Evening, everybody. Welcome to today's live Q&A. I'm Jennifer, for those who don't know me, and I'm excited to have you here. I hope your day has been great. I want to address something that came up on the internet just the other day, and it was about what happens when the relationship between a client and a therapist gets ruptured in one way or another. For one reason or another, your relationship gets ruptured, and it can happen because, as you know, the relationship between a client and a therapist is a human relationship, and in every relationship there's always going to be a conflict in one way or another. And what matters the most is not that there's conflict, but how you repair that conflict. So I'm going to read what this person shared. It's a screenshot they sent when they told their therapist about something that offended them. So this is how the therapist responded, and I want to read it out so that we can analyze it, and it's going to be for both the therapists and the clients who are listening to this. As a therapist, how does a good response look like? How does a bad response look like? And as a client, what does it mean to speak up for yourself? So allow me to read what this client shared on the internet about what the therapist responded after they brought up an issue concerning how they felt they were treated in session by that therapist. So here goes. Dear Dash, I am sorry it has not been helpful to you to meet with me. I'm so glad that you're telling me all this. It is important to me that you know. It is important to me to know what's not working. I wish I had asked or made it somehow easier for you to tell me, and that you felt dismissed. And that you felt I dismissed your concerns about Dash. So Dash is whatever they were discussing at that time. That was never my intention, but I can see how that happened, and that you felt scolded and that I was annoyed. Again, not my intention. I was probably struggling with what to do, what direction to take, etc. I can imagine that it felt like annoyance to you. I am not sure what's not working, but it's not useful to you to continue if it's only making you agitated. I do worry that you are not getting what you need from me, and clearly that has been true. I want you to do what is best for you. I am happy to talk to you about this. It's also fine if you want to just leave it as it is and not meet today. Again, I don't know what will be most helpful to you. I do realize that Dash, so Dash is whatever they were talking about, is very important to you, and that's why your energy should go. That's where your energy should go right now. I wish with all my heart that it all works out for you. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to work with you, and maybe we have gone as far as we can. Please take care. I'm available today at our regular time if you want to discuss, but no pressure. Please do what is best for you. So personally, reading that entire response, I found it very validating. Obviously, you can tell that these clients felt that the therapist was annoyed in session, or they felt like the therapist was not receptive to them, was not listening to them properly. They felt that the therapist was scolding them in one way or another. So I think there must be, maybe in the session there was some kind of friction, and this can come up for various reasons. As you can tell from that response, the therapist has clearly spoken about that they were going through their own personal thing on that day, and that is something that I think is quite important to discuss, because as I keep saying, and as I've said in previous conversations here, therapists are human beings, and they go through their own problems. They struggle on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes you'll come to session and maybe your therapist, you might not know this, but maybe your therapist has just come from getting a very painful phone call from somebody in their family, and so they've come to session and they are not at their best, or they're just hungry and they are hungry and angry at the same time. You know, that happens. Their blood sugar is low, and maybe they're just grumpy for one reason or another, or they didn't sleep well. These things happen. And so when you listen to that apology, that I wouldn't even call it an apology. I think it's more of an apology plus an explanation at the same time. So the first thing that I want to point out is the fact that this therapist validates the client's feelings, as you've had in the email that was sent. The therapist is very open to validating the client's feelings, saying there's a place where she said, I wish I'd asked or made it somehow easier for you to tell me what was going on with you. and that you felt I dismissed your concerns about dash. That was never my intention, and I can see how that happened. So listening to that, first of all, that is somebody who has a good level of emotional intelligence as a therapist. We can borrow a lot from this therapist who wrote this particular response. You have to be at a place where when your client brings up something that bothers them in session, as a therapist, you don't get defensive. You don't start telling them, what do you mean you got angry? What do you mean I was scolding you? I was not. You don't start now explaining what you are doing or not doing, because at the end of the day, the client feels that you are negative towards them. And I have said this before in another conversation as well, that one of the most important things in therapy is the relationship that the client has with the therapist, and more so the perception the client has about the relationship they have with the therapist. So it's not always about the therapist. So as a therapist, when your client tells you that they feel some type of way about an interaction they had with you, that is not the time to become defensive. That is not the time to start telling them about what you didn't or did do. That is not the time to start explaining yourself. That is the time to validate your client, to tell them that you understand where they are coming from. And that does not mean that now you're guilty. Again, this is not about placing guilt or making people feel bad for the things they did or said. This is about just trying to get to the root, and also realizing that your client is a human being and they go through their own interpretations of whatever happens in therapy. So I found that quite a good thing for this therapist to have done, to have validated the client's feelings. I like that the client spoke up. I know I have also said this before. As clients, when you're in therapy, it is highly encouraged that when something is working out or not working out, you need to speak up about it. So if this client had gone on acting as if what happened with the therapist was not hurtful to them, or what happened with the therapist did not affect them, it's very possible that the therapist could have continued with therapy acting as if nothing is wrong, because from the therapist's point of view, they might not have seen something is wrong. And it's not because that the therapist is not keen or anything. It's because they're human and they can miss some things. So as a client, I keep encouraging clients to always speak up. I know sometimes it feels uncomfortable to bring up difficult conversations, but always remember, in the therapeutic relationship, we are trying to model what it looks like to have a healthy relationship. We are trying to model what it looks like for you to speak up when something is uncomfortable, so that when you go out there and you're dealing with your own people, your own family and friends, and something uncomfortable comes up, something difficult comes up, you will find the courage within you to speak up about that thing, because you've already had that same interaction with your therapist. You've been able to bring up a difficult conversation with somebody who is close to you. That is why it matters that you bring up when you bring up uncomfortable conversations. So again, I'm very happy that this client was able to bring up the issue that affected them with their therapist. They did not keep quiet, because at the end of the day, they would have gotten a disservice. They would have gone back to therapy feeling like there's an elephant in the room and they have not addressed it, and that would have hindered their capacity to be honest with their therapist. And then at the end of the day, they'll go out there and be like, oh, therapy does not work, and it's because there was this big thing that was happening that they could not discuss with the therapist. So I am also super happy to see how this client feels comfortable with their therapist, because you can tell, for somebody to bring up something that is uncomfortable, they have to know that that the relationship is safe enough for you to bring up an uncomfortable discussion, an uncomfortable conversation. So it is obvious that this relationship between these two people is very safe at the time, and this person is able to bring up whatever hurts them, and they don't feel that they need to hide. And that is something I always encourage. Again, when you're working with a therapist, be open and try to build a healthy relationship with your therapist. Your therapist is open to listening to you. Most therapists will be open to listening to whatever you're going through, and they'll be open to addressing things when they happen. Something that I also liked is how the therapist admitted their own limitations and their own humanity. You can tell that when the client brought up whatever was going on at that time, the therapist mentioned about how I was probably struggling what to do, what direction to take, etc. And I can imagine that it felt like annoyance to you. I am not sure what is not working out, but it's not useful to you to continue if it's only making you agitated. There's also somewhere that she mentioned that she might have been going through something difficult in her own life at the time. Yeah, there's somewhere that the therapist mentions that she might have been going through something difficult in her own life, and that could have been a factor in the way she responded to the client. And as I said from the beginning, therapists are human beings, and when they struggle with their own things, sometimes those things can spill over into the therapy session, and that does not mean that now you have to get rid of the therapist altogether because they're struggling with their own thing. That means that the therapist needs to be self-aware enough to go to their own therapy and deal with their own problem and then come back to therapy. But sometimes that there will be no room for those things at the same time. So let's say that your therapist receives a very distressing phone call just 5 minutes before you come into session. They're not going to cancel the session when you're there, of course, unless that thing is like an emergency. So of course that thing is going to affect them, and it might come up in therapy. It might show up in therapy. So also have a bit of grace for your therapist to remember that they're human and they struggle. As I said, I liked that the therapist admitted their own limitations. They admitted that their own problems could have affected how they interacted with the client during that session. I like that the therapist took responsibility. They did not get defensive. The therapist did not start saying, there's this and this that is going on, or this is how you should see it from my point of view. They did not start getting defensive in this entire conversation. They were very open. They were very keen to listen to the clients, and that is a good thing from a therapist. Remember, again, therapists are humans. Something I want to point out is relationships go through cycles of ruptures and repairs. So a rupture is when things fall apart, and then repair is how you make those things come back together. And in a therapeutic relationship, that will happen as well, just as it will happen in any other relationship you have in your life. So when there's an issue of rupture in the relationship, be open to repair as a client, and also as a therapist, be open to repairing that relationship. Just because there's been a rupture in a relationship does not mean that that relationship automatically has to end. A rupture is just an opportunity for you guys to see how you can rebuild the trust. And of course, there's some relationships where the trust cannot be rebuilt, but in most relationships, trust can be rebuilt. And so maybe this is a call to action for anybody who's listening, to be like, just because mmekosana in one way or another does not mean that that relationship has to end. Always be open to repairing your relationships, especially in this era we are living in, where people are very willing to cut people off and to end things on a whim. People are not willing to give people second chances. I am asking that you become one of those people who is willing to give people second chances sometimes, because ruptures happen all the time. And if you end every relationship you have because there was a rupture, it means you're going to end up with no relationships at all, because relationships always have ruptures and repairs. And as I've said in the beginning, the most important part of all this entire rupture and repair cycle is the repair part. How fast do you repair that rupture, and how do you repair it? Is it from a place of coercing people to see your point of view, so that or is it from a place of actually being honest about how you feel and how it has affected you and what you want to see in future? What kind of a repair have you put in place? So I think that is an important thing. Consider it when you're working through your relationships. You can tell that the therapist was also very open to repairing the relationship. The therapist was able to put their ego aside. There's something that the therapist said, which was, where is it? They said, I wish with all my heart that it all works out for you, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and work with you. And maybe we have gone as far as we can. I am available today at our regular time if you want, but no pressure. So this therapy says that the client can come back to session if they want to discuss it. There's also the place where they mentioned actually, the therapy says, I want you to do what is best for you, and I am happy to talk with you about this. It is also fine if you want to leave it just as it is and not meet today. There are two things in that sentence. One, the fact that the therapist has set aside their ego, and the therapist is very open to repairing the relationship. So they didn't tell the client, I understand that what I did might have offended you, and now go and find somebody else who is going to help you because I don't think I'm the right person for you. They didn't go on this gaslighting kind of thing that could happen when somebody offends you. There's this gaslighting the path that they could have taken that could have led them to a very different place. But this therapist is very open to having the conversation with the client and trying to repair the relationship. So Again, that's a big thing that's important. I'm very proud of this therapist, the way they handled this entire situation. I like that the therapist was very respectful to the decision that the client was going to take, and they allowed the client to have this thing in therapy we call autonomy. So autonomy is obviously knowing that the client has the power to make the decision they want to make without coercion, without blackmailing, without any kind of intimidation or whatever. The client can make the decision that works best for them. And so, as you've heard from that previous sentence, the therapist was very open for the client to make the best decision for themselves. If that decision is coming back to therapy and rebuilding the relationship with the therapist was open to that. If that decision is the client taking time off or the client going to find somebody else, the therapist is also open to that. And that's why I keep saying, if something happens in therapy and there's a problem with your therapist is not going to get angry at you for the decision that you make. At the end of the day, remember that therapy is for you. Yes, the therapist benefits from having you in therapy in one way or another. But at the end of the day, the therapy services are for you. You're the one who's there to benefit from those therapy services. So if you're having therapy and it's not working out for you, it's important for you to bring it up with your therapist. Don't be silent. Speak up so that you can be heard. If you continue acting like nothing is happening, the therapist is going to assume nothing is happening. And that is going to become a place where there's a lot of lies and there's a lot of hiding. It can become very shaming. It can become very uncomfortable for both you and the therapist because there's this elephant in the room that is not being addressed. As I've said before, therapy is a place for you to understand what good healthy relationships look like. In therapy, it's where you learn how to set boundaries and what healthy boundaries look like. That's why even your therapist usually has boundaries with you, because they're trying to show you that in a healthy relationship, people have boundaries, and that's what makes the relationship with your therapist healthy. So think about it that way. If there's a challenge in therapy, always be open to speak about it, and I think that will make things easier for you and it will make things easier for your therapist as well. So that's the thing that I wanted to address today. I hope that this has been beneficial for you as a therapist, as a client, and if there's something that I mentioned that you have a question about that you would like to follow up, I think that would be nice. I would be willing to answer it. You can always send your questions to the DMs or on email. I'm always available to check them out and respond. Yes, Loud Like Psych KE says going on like something is not wrong will hurt the therapeutic relationship. I agree with you. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That if you don't bring up when issues when they are there, then things are going to get worse. They never get better. They just get worse, and you don't benefit in therapy at all. So yeah, bring that up, address it, and yeah, I think therapy will be more beneficial for you when you're honest with yourself and with your therapist. So that's the thing that I wanted to address today, and I hope you have gotten a thing or two out of this entire conversation. And I hope to see you next week for another Q&A, and we'll be discussing more stuff. And until then, I will see you. Have a wonderful evening and take care of yourselves. And yeah, ciao.